Hey everybody! This is Death by D4, and this is the story of when I married a Tiefling. Yes, you heard me right. Backed by popular demand, the story of my half-elf warlock Davrian Luceren and his lovely Tiefling sweetheart Coco continues. However, before we dive into everything, allow me to just quickly explain what's going on so that we were all on the same page. From this point on, these stories no longer come from the same campaign as my previous story videos. In fact, not only do I have a new dungeon master, but this is also a solo player campaign, where I am the only player. Yes, it is a bit of a shame that the original campaign couldn't resume even after the global pandemic. However, having been playing in this new one for a couple of sessions, I can safely assure all of you that everything has been left in capable hands. Alright, so with all of that said, there's a lot to go over, so be sure to subscribe and let's dive right in. Having finished our long venture north, my party and I were about to confront the evil and possessed Rin, having tracked her down to an ancient arcane temple hidden deep within the mountaintops. Apparently, it had been the focal point of some great and historical event, one that had nearly destroyed every trace of magic within several miles of the surrounding area, and Rin was about to use the temple's power to try and ignite some kind of magic-devouring plague that would bring upon the very end of the world as we knew it. Yeah, seriously, talk about stakes, am I right? Anyway, despite all of the drama, I'll admit that I wasn't entirely sure why Rin was really doing this, besides the whole fact that she was possessed by an evil spirit. And as if to surprise nobody, Davrian didn't really care anyway. After all, the only thing that he cared about was finally seeing this overly drawn out quest through to its conclusion, forgetting all about it, and heading off to be with Coco. I mean, seriously, can you blame him? Especially after how things were left? No, of course not. Anyway, upon entering into the foul depths of the temple, we were quickly set upon by a horde of terrible monsters, all appearing to look like magical parodies of many different kinds of vicious animals. However, that wasn't the concerning part, as what really caught my attention was the fact that these monsters were infused with some kind of abjured power, one granting them the ability to siphon away and devour magic. As such, it became very difficult for me to actually remain relevant during the encounter, forcing me instead to rely entirely on my Eldritch Blast to resolve most of my issues. Oh well, I already knew that I had to save my strength for later anyway, so in typical Davrian fashion, I just hid away behind my allies and relied on them to see our way through. What, just because I'm a changed man doesn't suddenly mean I'm a frontline character? So then, after finishing our long descent and bypassing a great many other perils, we finally came upon the temple's inner sanctum, where we then confronted Rin using some kind of magical artifact to evoke her ritual. To say the least, we knew full well what she was trying to do, so we didn't waste anyone's time with pleasantries. Instantly, she let loose another horde of vicious monsters, and the final battle was upon us. Right away, my allies and I wasted no time in trying to bring her down, assailing her between swarms of her terrible minions and powerful castings of her magic. Then, just as we were able to burn through the last of her legendary resistances, she abandoned her ritual to make one final stand against us. However, with her defenses exhausted, and the last of her minions swiftly falling, I then went ahead and enacted my plan to save Rin from the evil spirit. Swiftly, I pulled out a small satchel of ruby dust and used it to cast Force Cage around her. Then, with her helplessly trapped inside, we went about dispatching the last of her minions before I got everything ready to exorcise her. With a saintly flourish, I pointed my finger down the floor and cast Wish, replicating the effects of the Hollow spell. Then, it was just a matter of time before the Force Cage expired and the Hollow spell could take effect, which would then exorcise Rin and allow me to finally seal away the evil spirit inside of her. So beneath the hideous array of verbal lashings, I walked straight up towards her and, without saying anything to her, pulled out a spell scroll of imprisonment alongside a hefty gemstone. Upon seeing this, the specklings of terror then entered into her eyes. It was truly at this moment that the spirit realized that it had just lost. With perfect timing, and maybe an extra hour of in-game wasted time, I began to recite the words upon the spell scroll as the gemstone within my hand began to rise and hover within the air. Then, right as the Force Cage expired, the Hollow spell took effect over Rin, pushing the evil spirit out of her body and leaving it vulnerable to my magic. Now all I had to do was cast imprisonment upon it, and it would be harmlessly sealed away within the gemstone. Which, was a lot more stressful than it needed to be. I mean, since I couldn't normally cast imprisonment, as I was many levels short in Warlock to actually be able to do that, I had to make an ability check to actually cast the spell at all. So all things considered, that kind of meant that the entire outcome of this finale rested entirely on me making a single die roll. Well, at the very least, I did succeed it, so yeah. No crazy last-second scrambling had to occur for the sake of a bad roll, which was kind of nice. Anyway, so as I finished reciting the final words upon the spell scroll, a tendril of magic then shot out towards the evil spirit and latched onto its essence. Then, within a torrential swirl of violent magic, the tendril then reeled it in and trapped it deep within the gemstone. At long last, we defeated the evil spirit and saved the world from impending destruction. Hooray! Soon after that, my allies then ran up beside Rin and attempted to rouse her from her unconscious state. However, given the condition of her body after the battle, nobody was actually sure if she would actually awaken. Concerned for her well-being, one of the rogues then administered to her a healing potion. And then, after a brief coughing fit, Rin opened her eyes and greeted us in a familiar manner. We'd finally saved her from her bout of dark possession. Immediately, she then went about bombarding us with all sorts of questions, namely those equivalent to where she was and what had happened to her. In making a long story very short, we gave her the gist of our adventures, before making a good point of mentioning that it was, in most parts, thanks to me that she had come out of the whole ordeal in one piece. To say the least, Rin simply refused to believe this, but after some kind insistence from my fellow party members, she eventually gave me the best thank you that she could possibly muster while trying to hide her appreciation as much as possible. Yeah, in all honesty, hearing her actually say that did kind of feel bittersweet at that point, though Davrian did still appreciate it to some extent. After all, he had been harboring regret for what had happened to her this entire time, so even though all he could get from her was some sloppy, half-felt apology, he still appreciated and knew, deep down, that it had been the right thing to do in the very end. Anyway, with everybody still battered and bruised from the climactic encounter, we decided then to take a short rest right then and there in the dungeon. Then, once we were all finished, I cast teleport over the whole group and brought us all back towards civilization, that being the starting town which we had spent most of the campaign up until that point. Which, admittedly, none of you actually know the name of this town, and I do remember what it is, but I'm never going to share it because it was the stupidest name possible. After that, there wasn't really much else that needed to be said. The party then broke up and we all went our separate ways. Sure, as listeners of the story, this might seem somewhat odd. However, in all honesty, almost nobody in this party actually became friends with each other over the entire adventure. Not only that, but I'm pretty sure about half of the party actually just straight up despised Davrian, even though I had stuck my neck out several times to save the lives of our other party members on multiple occasions. So after having saved the world from total destruction, everybody just kind of made their farewells and left to pursue their goals elsewhere, leaving Davrian to turn down one of the nearby streets and make his way off towards Coco's residence. After all, there was still some important business that he needed to take care of, and you all know damn well what I'm talking about. So after making my way over towards her house, I was then horribly disappointed to find that she wasn't there. Nope, not only was all of my knocking met with utter silence, but a quick peek through one of the windows was all it took to confirm that she wasn't home. Oh well, at least I had no reason to be alarmed by this, but as soon as I turned myself back around, I was then alarmed by a small wind sprite who had snuck up behind me amidst my confusion. Instantly, I nearly fell over, and then asked the wind sprite exactly what it was doing there. Well, seemingly annoyed by my question, the wind sprite then threw it back in my face, telling me that I should be off with Coco instead of fumbling around here on my own. Well, I then explained to the wind sprite that I actually had no idea where Coco was, to which it then informed me that she was actually exactly where I had left her. Yep, back in the Elemental Sprite Village, where I had originally made my proposal to her. Of course, as relieved as I was to hear that, this turn of events did actually surprise me a little, as I'd assumed that the Elemental Sprites would have just brought Coco back home soon after my departure. However, to my incredible surprise, it turns out that the small community of elemental sprites had become enraptured in our blossoming romance, and, in a decision that I can only assume was made with the best of intentions, had then decided to kidnap Coco so as to cater our wedding for us. Yeah, I mean, it's not like kidnap was really the right word to use for the occasion, but, I mean, it's how the wind sprite explained it to me, so, yeah, I just decided it was best to go along with it. So having learned Coco's whereabouts, I then felt it would be somewhat appropriate to ask the wind sprite if it could help return me to the elemental village. However, I really should have known better than to ask at this point, as before I could get my question out, the wind sprite then flew over, grabbed my wrist, cast Windwalk on me, and began hurling me through the air at breakneck speeds. Still, despite our blistering pace, it was going to take us quite a fair bit of time to actually arrive there. So in the interim of me screaming bloody murder, I was able to take repeated pauses amidst my hysteria to simply catch my breath before I continued. Finally, upon arriving at the elemental village, I was then released from the wind sprite's grasp and allowed to fall helplessly upon the ground. Then, amidst a sea of onlookers, the wind sprite loudly proclaimed that I had returned to everyone, which then caused the entire village to suddenly erupt into chaos. Hearkened by haste and reckless abandon, nearly every sprite within earshot dropped everything that they were doing and went about quickly beginning preparations for the impending wedding, causing me to feel a bit overwhelmed amidst the sea of excitement that I was now caught within. Instantly, I tried my best to then slip away from the crowd unnoticed, but after failing my stealth check in spectacular fashion, I was then set upon by a swarm of sprites, who then dragged me off to get me fitted in my attire. As you could expect, from that point on, I could do very little else besides whatever they wanted, granting me only reprieve at the end of the day, where they then took me and locked me up inside of a small house. Of course, I then tried to leave and go see Coco, but the sprites insisted that it would be impolite to see my bride the night before our wedding. So with all of them patiently watching every possible escape exit that I could take, I kind of just accepted that I wouldn't be going anywhere, and just decided to give up. All things considered, it wasn't all that upsetting, as I'd been given a really nice bed to sleep on, and a very lovely meal, so that was pretty nice of them. Anyway, having had my fill for the day, and with very little else to do, I then decided to lay down on my bed and get some rest. However, I was quickly denied that luxury when a magical irritation began to pinch me from deep within my soul. Well, knowing what that meant, I then reached out beside me and summoned forth one of my succubi familiars, and asked her what she wanted from me. Oh, and just because I don't believe I ever mentioned this, my succubi's names were Stella and Loretta. Yes, if you happen to get that reference, then congratulations, you are a respectable nerd. Anyway, having summoned forth Stella by random chance, I was then quickly berated by her for having ignored her and Loretta throughout the entire climax of my adventure. I mean, sure, I'd technically done that, but at this point, I become such a disappointment for the twins in general that I'd basically just accepted that as an expectation for me. However, that wasn't the only reason why she was chewing me out right then, as she then wanted to berate me for attempting to marry Coco without their consent. Of course, as any reasonable person would, I then informed her that I did not need her permission to marry anybody, not to mention that both her and Loretta already knew that I was going to marry Coco. So in all sense, I didn't really know where all this was coming from. Well, after viciously cornering me into the back of my bed frame for having talked back to her in such a tone, Stella then expressly stated that it had nothing to do with my feelings and everything to do with my contract. Confused, I then properly asked her to explain herself. So at this point, Stella then did something that I wasn't at all prepared for. She then quickly grew in size to her usual proportions, sat herself straight down upon my waist, reached down between her, notable feminine assets, and drew out an infernal scroll. Then with a quick flick of her wrist, she then unfurled the fiendish parchment and put on a delicate set of reading glasses. I mean, seriously, I don't know what was more surprising, the fact that I was currently mounted by a succubus, or the fact that she was wearing reading glasses. Either way, I just sort of went ahead and bit my tongue, so as not to react to anything happening at this point. So with Stella firmly upon my groin, she then began to recite various elements of my contract that I'd never been made aware of before. I mean, come on. Back when I made this pact with the twins, I'd been largely done it out of the concern of just staying alive. So it's not like I even cared about all the details in the given moment. However, after having read through most of it properly, she then went on to state the notable problem that had arisen within it, being that I was referred to as a falsified bloodline, which now needed to be changed. Of course, I then questioned why this was important, and in degrading fashion, Stella then informed me that if I actually got married, then my falsified name would actually become recognized, causing the pact to fold and grant my soul to the next uncontested third party, which at the time was my previous eldritch patron, who I still drew power upon through my previous family. So yeah. To say the least, I already knew Davrian was completely screwed when it came to the afterlife, but I had always dismissed that problem as a problem for future Davrian. However, seeing as my patron was now demanding me to fix it at the given moment, I then decided that she was right and that I should actually address the matter once and for all. Genius roleplaying, I know. Anyway, after having heard that, I then looked up to Stella and simply asked her what she wanted me to do. Well, first things first, she then told me that my infernal contract had to be amended, and to do that all I had to do was read it over and agree to it. Then, she wanted me to finally rescind my eldritch bloodline, as I no longer needed to rely upon it after having dealt with Rin and the evil spirit. Finally, both her and Loretta wanted me to properly compensate them for having never repaid them for the lending of their power. Well, considering how important this all was, I then felt it was only best that I, in typical Davrian fashion, immediately accepted the infernal amendment without reading it, agreed to repay the succubi with whatever they desired, and informed Stella that I would revoke my eldritch bloodline before the end of tomorrow. What, I mean, just because I'm a better person now doesn't mean I've suddenly lost all my bad habits. Instantly, I then felt a sharpened sensation shoot through the very recesses of my soul, causing my entire body to seize up into a terrible fit of pain and agony. Then, just as quickly as it started, I was suddenly released from it, only to be left within a mild state of discomfort, one that felt like many thousands of tiny embers flowing deep within my veins. To say the least, I hadn't expected such a drastic change to occur right away, but yeah, I'd definitely been proven wrong. Then, in an air of fiendish delight, Stella informed me that the pact had been struck anew, and, if I didn't follow through on my promise to actually revoke my eldritch bloodline before the end of tomorrow, that my soul would then be torn asunder by the wrath of the infernal forces. Truly wonderful, I know. Though, honestly, I was also starting to realize that my infernal patrons were starting to take better notice of my lackadaisical tendencies. So in an attempt to fix that part of me, my soul was now being held at gunpoint. Again, truly wonderful. Oh well, at least things weren't about to get any worse, right? I mean, right? So at this point, Stella then dismissed the contract, and her glasses, with a flick of her wrist, and, just as her pupils began to dilate, she leaned down over top of me and planted her lips firmly against mine, kissing me with a passion akin to that of a desperate lover in need of tempered affection. To say the least, I wish I could have enjoyed that whole moment. However, with her being a succubus, all this did for me was cause my entire body recoil in a staggering amount of pain. So, yeah, definitely not the pleasant experience I could have hoped for, so that was a shame. Shortly after, Stella then paused in her assault and released me from her lips, granting me then the gaze of her infernal eyes glazed over in a lustful hunger. It was at that point that she then informed me that I would have to make up for all the bountiful men that I had promised to feed her up until that point. Which, considering how long that had actually been, was going to be quite a lot. So, pinned down against my will, there was literally nothing I could do as Stella then horribly ravaged me into the late hours of the evening. Then, just as I thought it was over, she swapped out for Loretta, and I had to go through the whole experience all over again. Well, all things considered, I was certainly lucky I got even a long rest after that evening. As with that one, I really don't know how things would have turned out for me. Anyway, come the next day, after I'd finally awoken, I then quickly realized that it was a lot closer to midday than it was to morning, which honestly surprised me, as I would have thought the sprites would have woken me up a lot earlier. However, upon meeting with the sprites, they then decided to delay things just to allow me the chance to properly rest after having seen what I'd been through the previous night. Yeah, in case any of you guys forgot, they were watching me the whole time. Honestly, that was pretty nice of them. However, what I didn't appreciate was the fact that they had just gone ahead and informed Coco of what had happened to me and why the wedding was being delayed. So, in what I felt was only the most appropriate response at the time, I then casually grabbed and threw that sprite into a nearby basket, and then left to get myself ready for the impending procession. In what felt like seconds, I was being groomed and outfitted into my form while by a giggling swarm of sprites, all of which were obviously overwhelmed by their unimaginable levels of excitement for the coming day. Likewise, I was too, though I was also quite a bit more nervous for what was genuinely a defining moment in Davrian's life. To say the least, I just didn't want anything to go wrong, so I was about to uphold myself to my best behavior possible just to make sure that could happen. Then, after transforming into the spitting image of a Fakin nobility, I was then escorted to the wedding venue, which was this beautiful overgrown alcove of nature nestled deep within the woods. There, hidden amongst the shafts of radiant sunlight, sat the remnants of an ancient altar belonging to some kind of long-forgotten religion. Beside me, positioned upon the altar, sat the village guardian Phoenix, who, after shrinking in size, had taken up the responsibility of being our marital officiant for the coming event. To say the least, I was actually quite impressed with how everything was being handled up until this point. However, what really took my breath away was the sight of my beloved when she suddenly appeared before me and began walking her way down the aisle. There, accompanied by a harmonious chorus of sprites singing in whimsical harmony, came Coco, my fiancée. Dressed in what I could only describe as a beautiful, saintly white gown befitting of inhuman royalty, she softly ascended the steps towards me amidst an air of grace founded only in heartfelt engagement. Her very presence seemed to radiate a cascade of rainbow light, seeded from an array of beaded gemstones interlaced all throughout her attire, like the evening stars twinkling amidst the nightly sky. Her veil seemingly appeared to float aloft around her, carried within a delicate air akin to the gentleness of a seaside breeze, and within her hands lay an elaborate bouquet of fantastical flowers, granting her image the completeness that could only captivate me beyond any reasonable sense that I could conjure. This wonderful woman was about to become my lawfully wedded wife, and for the first time ever, Davrian was truly at a loss for words within that everlasting moment. And then she slapped me. Instantly, everything came to a grinding halt, as everybody froze amidst an air of complete silence. Timidly, I then looked back towards Coco, and after a quick insight check, saw an absolute fury burning deep within her eyes, broken only by the faintest shimmer of tears hidden behind a betrayal of her rampaging emotions. Unsurprisingly, she was probably angry at me for last night, if not angry at me for a lot of other things, but she also appeared to be completely overwhelmed by either her joyous or fearful emotions. So, in knowing somewhat where she was coming from, I just softly nodded an apology and said that I deserved that before we stepped up together and faced our officiant. From there, proceedings advanced as normal, with the Phoenix speaking on behalf of the gods and their observance of our joyous union in matrimony. Then, once it came for me to say my vows, I then turned towards Coco and said roughly the following.
Coco, before we met, there was truly no hope for me to have any kind of meaningful future. Now, with you by my side, I have been given the chance to become far more than anything I could have ever imagined, and share in the joyous moments of living in this life as a true resident of the world. You're truly everything to me, and though I may never be able to properly express my gratitude, I am forever grateful to you for having become a part of mine. Though the sins of my past may leave my soul marred by regret, know that there exists nothing stronger than my love and commitment to you.
And then with a hand I pointed a finger up into the air and said,
and with all as my witness, I shall bring an end to Daetris Eladriel and become what can only truly be considered yours. I wish to give up my eldritch bloodline.
With a snap of my fingers, a piercing metallic light then erupted from deep within my body, bathing me in a temporal wreath unbound by the very fabric of space and time. A dulcet tone rang out around us, and just as my vision began to blur over in a whitely veil, the light scattered from off my being, leaving everyone to marvel at the cascade of stars falling gently in their return back to the aether. In that moment, I was no longer of eldritch origins, and had lost all of my levels in sorcerer, leaving me as a lowly 3rd level warlock for all to behold. Well, that certainly took care of that business, and in typical Davrian fashion, I'd taken the opportunity to do so to also add a bit of flair of theatrics to the procession. Well, at least Coco had taken it well, so I'd say it was probably worth it. Next came Coco's vows, which honestly was the very first thing I was about to hear from her since my return. Upon taking a deep breath, she then slowly and carefully recited her words to me, trying desperately with each and every breath to keep her emotions in check. In many ways, seeing her struggle in this way only made Tavrian's heart yearn for her even more. Within her speech, she explained to me just how everything lately had felt like a never-ending dream to her, one bound by the fantasies of the tales that she had read in her books her entire life. Even now, she knew not truly what was going to happen to her, but knew only that her feelings and I would lead her towards everything that she could have ever hoped for, a love and a companionship unlike anything she could have imagined for herself. She thanked me for having accepted her into her life, and with a brightened smile hindered only by the marrings of tears, she told me that she would hold on to our love forever. Upon hearing that, the crowd of sprites began to hum with excitement, just as the Phoenix then called out for our rings to be brought up to us. Delicately, I then slipped on the familiar silver ring onto Coco's finger, just as she then slipped on a similar one to mine, one adorned by an emerald to match my eyes, much like how I'd chosen my ring for her. Then, with the end of the procession soon upon us, the Phoenix proclaimed us as husband and wife. Then I took Coco in my arms and embraced her with a passionate kiss. The crowd of onlooking sprites simply broke out into an uproarious applause. From then on, everything kind of just devolved into organized chaos, as the following festivities then consumed the entire rest of our day. From what was most notable, we danced together amidst an air of fey-kin music, and feasted like royalty upon a bounty presented to all who attended. The entire time, Coco was nothing but laughs and smiles beside me, kissing me often in between heights of our celebration. Honestly, seeing her like this just reminded me of the first time we'd been on a date together, which kind of tugged on my heartstrings a little bit, seeing how far things had come since that faithful encounter. Then, as the sun began to make its descent within the sky, Coco and I were suddenly swept up by the elemental sprites and whisked off to some far-off corner of the forest. Then, before I knew what was going on, I was suddenly stripped out of my attire and given a lavish gown before suddenly being left alone within the darkness. Cautiously, I stepped forward through the foliage and came upon a moonlit clearing centered only by a wide and dense layer of flowers. Then, from the other side, Coco emerged from the foliage with her attire seemingly altered like my own. From there, we could only awkwardly laugh at one another, knowing full well what was kind of being set up for us, and hey, in all honesty, I was totally for it. So, coming to hold one another in each other's arms, Coco quietly expressed her love to me as I did the same for her in turn. Then, just as she reached a hand under the folds of my gown, she blinked in astonishment when she suddenly realized that all my eldritch tattoos were gone. Surprised by this, I then took a moment to inspect myself, and sure enough, they were all gone. Which, in all honesty, wasn't all that surprising, as they likely just vanished when I rescinded my bloodline. Oh well, it's not like I was really gonna miss them anyway. So, without further ado, I then turned back to Coco, joined her amongst the flowers lay beneath us, and we formally began our lives as a married couple. And that's it. If you liked the video, then be sure to subscribe and let me know what you think down in the comments below. And if you'd like to have the chance to play D&D with me, then feel free to join my Discord server, and consider supporting me over on Patreon. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see all of you in the next video.